God, they're gonna call me the Gibby of Deltarune after this one. Hey there. So, this video may be a bit of a controversial one within the Deltarune community, as this is a widely held belief that has been held by the community for quite a long time now. This video is tackling the theme of escapism in Deltarune, in the sense that I'm taking a stance to say that I don't think that this is really a prominent theme in Deltarune, and it, to me at least, clearly has not been conveyed in the plot up to this point, and if it will be, I don't think it will be a main theme of the game, more like just a dark world. The theory of Deltarune and escapism has existed for a very long time, as right after Chapter 2 is when people had started talking about it. And at the time, I thought it was pretty plausible with the two chapters we had, because we didn't really know where the story was going from there. With each new chapter though, I have felt that the theory has gotten relatively weaker, but to my surprise, there are so many videos on this topic. Specifically after chapter 3 and 4, I saw like so many different videos that had come out talking about it. But I don't think this theme is as strong as people are making it out to be, if it exists at all, and that's what I want to discuss today. One last thing before starting, if you disagree with me, that's perfectly fine. We're all up to our interpretations, right? This video is mostly just my differing interpretation of the current story of Deltarune and its themes thus far, because themes aren't something that you can necessarily have evidence, like rock hard evidence for, and is more interpretation based. And I'm also deeply sorry if I'm just completely ignorant to some things in this video. Like, please tell me if I missed something. I want to have a discussion in the comment section. So, you probably know what escapism is, but just a quick definition for all of us to set some groundwork. Escapism is a mental diversion from the unpleasant, stressful, or mundane aspects of daily life. It is achieved through activities involving imagination, entertainment, or fantasy. Sorry for being a dictionary, but just from the definition alone, you can already see how this would connect to Deltarune. So, the theory is that escapism is a theme of Deltarune that is being shown through the Dark Worlds. But the theory goes a step further, with each Dark World being a different form of escapism through varying media. Now, this theory has pretty solid evidence, honestly, for the most part, and I will be saying that here, as I want to really go through the theory. So, if we go back to our definition, a word that probably immediately stood out to you from the definition is the mention of fantasy, which obviously connects straight away to the Dark World. Not only are the Dark Worlds obviously a fantastical world, but the Dark Worlds are quite literally mentioned to be like a fantasy in the lyrics of Don't Forget. So that's already solid evidence. On top of this, our characters in the story would have a reason to want to escape from their daily lives. Each of our three main Lightners in Deltarune don't have perfect lives, with varying troubles in them that the Dark Worlds could give comfort from. Because so far the Dark Worlds have mostly been fun adventures. With Chris, we obviously see the situation they are in, with them being controlled and having some sort of trauma being hinted at through the egg rooms, and other things. Susie has presumably not had a great life, where she had to move a lot, and we don't know her home life, but it hasn't been hinted at very positively, at the very least. And finally, Noelle has a ton of things going on with her December, her mother, her father, yet she still tries to keep things together, obviously, and she's, like, at a breaking point. Like, you can see that through Snowgrave, and even the main route. These characters have lives that are very stressful and could be inclined to want to escape from through the Dark Worlds. Now, the last main piece of evidence that I want to bring up is through the Dark Worlds we've gotten so far. See, people tie each Dark World to a different form of escapism, and I will go through them quickly here. So, starting with Chapter 1, I hear some people say that it's like escapism through playing with toys, which to me, even if I was on board with this theory, this one especially sounds pretty weak for escapism. I think it's much stronger to say for the narrative that it establishes how fun the Dark Worlds can be for our characters, and they grow through it and make new friends, such as Susie meeting Lancer in Chapter 1, right? Chapter 2 would be escapism through computers and especially social media. It is really just supposed to be about the internet as a whole. Chapter 3 would also be self-explanatory, being through watching TV, and on top of this, through playing video games a little bit. Chapter 4 is through faith, and last but not least, Chapter 5 is through nostalgia and just living in the past, trying to make things go back to when they used to be. Asgore is trying to be proven right for something that happened so long ago that just shouldn't matter to him anymore. Now, there is some evidence for the theory that I didn't mention, mainly to do with characters, but I will bring that up later in this video. Now, the evidence that I did mention, while maybe not having a ton of points, is very, very strong evidence nonetheless. Because these are not minor pieces of evidence that are being hinted at, but big important story blocks that surround Deltarune's future and where the game would be going. It is obvious to see why this theory is so widely believed by the majority of people, players, theorists alike, but now it's my turn to rebuke some of it. Okay. I'm actually going to start with the last piece of evidence I just brought up for the theory, being that each Dark World is tied to a form of escapism. So, it is very easy to tie these Dark Worlds purely where they are located to a theme of escapism, and it does make sense. If you look on it purely from what they are, a computer world, a world with TV, a church, all of it makes sense of escapism. However, the Dark Worlds themselves, inside the narrative, don't have much of a commentary, if at all, on their forms of escapism. With Chapter 1, you could just say they're setting it up for later, so that's fair. That's why it's not obvious that escapism is being shown in this chapter. You could just say that it is showing how great of a world the Dark Worlds are, which is fair. It's a fair point to say if the Dark Worlds continued on like this. In Chapter 2, this theme is actually shown sort of at the end of the chapter, where the gang almost makes a second Dark World within the Chapter 2 one, because they were talking about how great the Dark Worlds are, right? And that was hinting at it a lot, but then Ralsei shuts it down, and from here on out, escapism is just not really shown in the remaining chapters. Chapter 3 especially is where this theory starts to dwindle for me. See, in Chapter 3, Tenna desperately wishes that our cast would want to stay in the Dark World, and have some sort of escapism because they want to escape from the real world, because he wants them to be in this Dark World forever. He doesn't want them to seal the fountain pretty desperately. I know he is, with the boards, he's just stalling for the night, but he also clearly wants the gang to keep playing his boards. He's obviously having fun. But here's the thing. Chris, Susie, and Ralsei, even though he wouldn't really be tied to escapism, all don't show interest of wanting to stay in that Dark World. After they do the first board, they just want to seal the fountain, seemingly. Chapter 4 by far shows escapism the least. Sure, the Dark World is in the church, but Chapter 4, I think surprisingly to a lot of us, had no commentary on religion at all. It was just about the prophecy, which wasn't a commentary on religion. It was more just how we gotta break our fate. And there was no commentary on religion, let alone escapism, through this chapter. Chapter 5, I will give, does have escapism themes of living in the past. It has major themes to this, but this is not conveyed, importantly, it's not conveyed through the Dark Worlds. Asgore's escapism starts before the Dark World, and doesn't have anything to do with it, really. He says himself that he never planned on staying in the Dark World, and he's just trying to gather proof to the people outside in the Light World, and I don't think he's lying here. I think it's clear that these Dark Worlds really don't have ties to escapism in and of themselves, because characters really aren't trying to stay in these worlds. Now, with the individual Dark Worlds out of the way, let's talk about overall. Hey, this might be a little jarring. Sorry, I know I just went in depth in this part of the video about each of the Dark Worlds. Sorry, this is me editing the video, me from the future. I've actually kind of shifted my stance while making this video. See, okay, this is unscripted, by the way, so sorry if this is really bad, but I have shifted my stance to a way, so a lot of this video is framing it as me saying that escapism isn't a theme of Deltarune, and I don't actually fully believe that. I actually didn't even really believe that when making this video, because I more thought of it as a minor theme, and I've actually found a better way to, like, vocalize that now with me thinking about it for, like, a couple days now, right? So, escapism, I think, more was a theme of Deltarune. I actually I don't even know why in the Chapter 2 part, I, like, completely glaze over Chapter 2, even though Chapter 2 probably has the most ties to escapism, especially within, like, the castle town, with Ralsei saying, I'm hoping this can be, like, a second home to you, and so many other lines with even Queen and stuff like that. Chapter 2 and Chapter 1, I think, were very much commentary on escapism. However, I think post-Chapter 3, is us moving on from escapism. In a sense that I don't think escapism is a main theme of Deltarune, it just more was a theme that we've moved past from. You know what I mean? As the chapters have changed and progressed, as the characters have grown. Because now the Dark Worlds aren't just a fantasy to our characters even. Like, Susie's no longer just seeing these as fun adventures because Asgore's now been kidnapped. Undyne's been kidnapped, right? To presumably the bunker. Well, sorry, we know the bunker, but yeah. I think that more escapism was a theme of Deltarune, and not that it was never a theme of Deltarune or isn't a theme of Deltarune. It just, more my point is that it wasn't a theme that people are making it out to be, because people are trying to, I feel like with all the videos, right, people try to make it out to be the main theme of Deltarune, which I really don't think it is. I don't actually think we'll get much more escapism content, but who knows for the future. I actually do talk about how escapism could be in the future of Deltarune, so just stay tuned, and I have more evidence also just saying that why I don't believe escapism is a main theme. One important thing to remember that I find to be one of the most important things when discussing Deltarune is that to remember that this game is extremely character driven. If a theme is going to show up, it will be through the characters of the game. You can already see this in the game. Chris has the theme of wanting to be free and freedom. With Susie, you have the theme of hope and bringing change. With Ralsei, you have the theme of the realization that you matter and deserve to live. More on this theme in a second. However, these characters don't show many signs of escapism, especially not Chris, and obviously not Ralsei because he lives in the Dark World. I know I skipped over Noelle. I will talk about Noelle later in this video. So let's talk about Susie though. Okay, so Susie, so far, hasn't really shown for care for closing these dark fountains. But you could say that is just because the people in it come back to Castletown, so it's completely fine if we seal the fountain, which is a fair point to make. I think that's extremely fair. Although, when Ralsei does say in Chapter 5 that we can't bring the flowers to Castletown because they're so delicate, Susie doesn't seem to really care about this statement. Now, the only signs of Susie using the Dark Worlds as a form of escapism is her currently staying in Castletown. So, once we get to the end of the game, it might be hard for her to seal the fountain. If that happens, you don't know if we're going to seal the Castletown Dark Fountain. You never know which way Deltarune is going. It's impossible to predict this game. However, to me, how I interpret things so far, I don't know how much that would be rooted in escapism and more just saying goodbye to her friends for the final time. Now, you may be saying that is a form of escapism because darkners are just objects that come to life, so they are basically just fictions. As the lyrics of Don't Forget says, these fountains are like fantasy. They're a fantasy world. And to that I say, Deltarune has not been conveying this message in the slightest, okay? See, my evidence so far is honestly not that strong. It's mostly and really just purely on how I view Deltarune so far, and the characters' reactions and emotions within the game. And while my point here is kind of more of that, I can't lie, I think that this interpretation that I'm going to say is much harder to brush aside as me seeing things differently from people. Because I am definitely not the one who only views it this way. So Darkners, right? See, if you wanted to make Dark Worlds a form of escapism, the game should not be trying to tell us that Darkners matter. Throughout Deltarune so far, in the past 3 chapters, 3, 4, and 5, Ralsei has been going through his arc of realizing that he isn't just meant to fulfill a single purpose to serve the Lightners, and that he deserves to enjoy himself and live as well. The scene that shows this the most is the start of Chapter 3, where Ralsei gives his speech about how Darkners are just objects, but Susie of course interjects saying that Ralsei and the other Darkners have feelings and emotions, so they are living beings and deserve to live. I don't care if you think Ralsei isn't a Darkner, because neither do I really. He's probably something else. But it's the same point, because the game is still applying this to every Darkner, such as Lancer, when the scene happens. To me, the game is trying to separate the idea that the Dark Worlds and the Darkners that inhabit it are just fiction, because we're being told that despite the reality being able to be ended and created by Lightners, they really aren't just fiction, and that they do matter at the end of the day. If you try to strip the Dark Worlds down to a work of fiction that the main characters use as a form of escapism, that would eventually need to end. Then I don't know why the game is making a point of Ralsei's life mattering and him deserving to have his own opinions and free will. See, I think at this point, I've at least made hopefully somewhat of a case of why I don't think escapism, at the very least, is a major theme of Deltarune that the game is really trying to tell us about. However, I do think escapism could still be conveyed through chapters 6, and I think that's the last hope of it, depending on what happens, and that would all center around Noelle. See, you might have forgotten because the game kind of wants you to forget at the end of chapter 5, but Rudy fell down, so he could be seriously injured, if not worse, depending on what fell down means. Now, a prediction that I've had since chapter 2 is that Noelle will want to stay in a dark world, especially because I think there's a chance we get Rudy in a dark world, in which he becomes perfectly healthy because of the magic that's within there, and he's like perfectly fine. And obviously, Noelle would not want you to seal a dark fountain, because that would lead to Rudy possibly just dying right after you seal that fountain. However, this is really just all speculation, and Noelle could also just want to escape into a dark world because Rudy just fell down, and that she's panicking and she wants a distraction out of the reality that she's living in. So, at the end of the day, escapism could be a theme of Deltarune. However, I have lost faith that it is one. If you still believe this theme, that is perfectly valid, of course. But I honestly think Deltarune isn't really trying to convey this message to us. Anyway, that's really all that I have for this video, so thanks for watching.